All right, let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Father, thank you for giving us this time to study your word and to study the evidence that you have given us as to your existence and the veracity of your religion that we follow. As we study the very important and relevant question tonight of why does evil and suffering exist since you are a loving God? And what does that say about your existence? I pray that this study will be beneficial to all the ones who are participating in it now, the ones who might watch this later. And I pray that souls will be strengthened and that you will be glorified. Help us to take what we learn and share it with others, Father, to bring more souls to you. I ask your blessings upon Clay and Sheila, and I ask that you keep us all safe and help us to have a good time with our loved ones during this holiday week. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so let me go ahead and pull up my go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint here. All right. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. We are going to be looking into the problem of suffering, suffering and evil in the world. We all know that it's here, don't we? We might not have been that much aware of it when we were kids, but as adults, we are very much aware of it, aren't we? And Jake is joining us, so let's get him involved in this. We see suffering just about every day, if not every day, right? We try our best not to let it overcome us, but sometimes it does, right? Sometimes bad things happen and they do overcome us, and not just us, not just Christians, but also many, many people who are not Christians, right? In fact, would you not say, I mean, I want some feedback here. Would you not say that the main reason why people choose not to believe in God is because they have experienced evil and suffering in their lives and or in the lives of their loved ones? So is that something that you would say is accurate?
Yes.
I don't know if it's necessarily the main reason, but I think it definitely plays a role in some people's lives.
Yeah, yeah. And in my experience, it's a lot. It's a lot of people. That's usually whenever I'm talking with someone who is an atheist or a skeptic or maybe a believer, but their faith is weak. This is the reason that's usually brought up. And the thing is that we can't figure out suffering completely, can we? I mean, I haven't logically analyzed all suffering to the point where I understand it completely. I can't, in this study tonight, I'm not going to be able to give you every single reason why it happens for sure. I mean, there's a lot that we don't know about it. We cannot subject all evil and all suffering to any kind of meaningful analysis. And because we can't do that, then some of us assume that the loving God that the Bible talks about cannot exist, because if God, the God we read about in the Bible, who is loving, and he is love and kindness personified, if he exists, then why does he allow evil to exist? Why does he allow suffering to exist? And that's a good question. And are you there, Jake?
Yes, sorry about that.
No problem. No problem. Just want to make sure you're there. I see two Jakes, two Jacob Kirklands on here.
Yeah, y'all better watch out. There's two of them now.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm getting feedback from one of you.
I'm trying to resolve that now. I apologize.
Okay. I'm going to go. All right. I'll put you on mute until you do. Let's go ahead and continue on. This question of if God is love, then how can evil exist? This is a question that there's nothing new about it. Thousands of years ago, this guy, he's a Greek philosopher, Epicurus. He had this same problem, and he presented the problem in this way. He basically said, if God wishes to prevent evil, but he can't, then that would mean that he is not all powerful. He went on to say, if God can prevent evil, but he will not do that, then that means he is not good. And he then says, if God has both the power to eliminate evil and he has the will to do so, then why is there evil? Why does evil and suffering exist? What are your all's thoughts on that?
That sounds very mathematical.
I figured you might like that.
Hey, John, I think it is just showing us that this world that we live in wasn't meant to be our home in the first place. And so it's full of sin, and there's something better waiting for us, the original plan. Well, it might not be the original because Adam and Eve messed that up, but something better. So if this was pain-free, we would never want to leave here and search for something better.
Very good point. Very good point. We're going to touch more on that, elaborate further on that in a few minutes. Any other thoughts?
Well, when it comes to his three statements, I agree with the first statement. If God wishes to prevent evil, but he can't, then he's not all powerful. I think that's a true statement. The second one, however, if God can prevent evil but will not, he is not good. I don't necessarily agree with that statement in its entirety, because it depends on why does he allow the evil to exist. If he's allowing it to influence us in ways to do, things in our lives, then, it's kind of like, we punish our children not because we want to do harm to them or we want bad things to happen to them, but because we want to teach them, what is right from wrong. So I think, maybe that's, his ability to allow evil to exist doesn't necessarily mean that he is not good.
That's a good point. I think we're going to touch on that further in the class too. Any other thoughts? I think that when I look at this at first glance, I think that these questions seem to make sense. They seem to be logical. Clay, as you brought out, it's almost like a mathematical equation. But I think we need to understand that they overlook one very important point, and I think you touched on that. And they assume that there is no good purpose to be served by God allowing evil and suffering in the world. Now, when I say that, there might be some that would say, well, John, nothing good can come out of God allowing evil to happen. Nothing good can come out of God allowing suffering to happen. We need to examine that. Are we sure about that? Yeah, again, as I brought out a few minutes ago, I don't think any of us would be so presumptuous as to say that we can completely understand the problem of suffering. All we really have is what God has revealed to us in his word. And other than what God has revealed to us in his word, we really don't know his plans. We really don't know his mind other than what he has revealed to us. So Romans brings that out. Romans 11, verse 33 says, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. how unsearchable are his judgment, and how inscrutable his ways. Now, with that said, though, if the Bible does provide enough answers to the question of why is there suffering in the world, and those answers can help us to accept whatever small amount of understanding we have about why suffering exists, we can accept that on the basis of faith. God tells us enough as to why he allows evil and suffering in the world for us to trust in him, to trust that he loves us, to trust that he will always do what is right. I have Genesis 18, verse 25 on there because that was a question that Abraham asked God. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? I think that we can glean from the Bible and from our own observations about evil and suffering, we can get enough information for us to know that we might not understand every single reason or might not even know every single reason, but we can know enough to trust that God allows evil and suffering because he has our best interest at heart. Does that make sense? So I want us to consider a few things tonight. First of all, let's define evil. What is evil? Someone define evil for me. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, is anything that breaks the law of God.
Okay, anything that breaks the law of God. Let's take the laws of God out of it just for discussion's sake. Because again, if you're discussing this with an atheist, then they're going to say, well, I don't believe that there is a God, so I don't believe that he has laws. So how would you ask the atheist to define what is evil? Any thoughts?
I guess the opposite of good. I don't know if that's a definition. Said the opposite of good. I don't know if that's a definition.
So evil is the opposite of good. Do you think, or wickedness too? Well, wickedness is the opposite of good, right? Yeah. Can you think of any way to define evil in which good is not a factor? Any thoughts on that?
No.
Clay's thinking hard here, mathematician. Yeah. Here's something I think we need to remember. Whenever someone raises the question of evil, they are basically acknowledging that there is some sort of universal system of rightness, of good, that there is some universal system of justice, which whatever they are calling evil violates. Like Jake, you brought out that evil is breaking the laws of God. Okay, well, let's say that God does not exist. All right, just hypothetically, God does not exist. Still, in order for evil to exist, there has to be some standard of what is considered to be right, what is considered to be good, that has been violated, right? Does that make sense? But here's the thing. If there is no God, then where did this universal system of rightness come from? Think about that. God does not exist. Let's just hypothetically throw that out there for the sake of discussion. God does not exist. So where does morality come from? Where does the sense that humanity ought to do this and ought not to do this? Where do we get that standard from if God does not exist?
If God does not exist, and that standard is entirely subjective from one individual to another.
Yeah, that is true. But I mean, how did one individual or another individual even come up with it? I mean, here's the thing. If there is no God, then what we consider to be right It didn't come from us because there's not a single human being. And again, we're taking Jesus out of the equation right now because for the sake of hypothesis, we're granting the hypothesis that God does not exist. We're going to meet the atheist on his level. All right, so atheist, let's say for the sake of discussion, you're right, God does not exist. So Jesus did not exist. And Jesus, the Bible teaches, is the only sinless, perfect being, right? But for the sake of discussion, he did not exist. We're meeting you on your level. So has there been any human being ever who has ever completely done what is right in every situation at all times?
No.
No. In fact, not only that, no human being has ever known from the first moment of his existence what is right. I mean, Clay, when you were born, did you automatically know everything about what is right and everything about what is wrong? Sheila, what about you?
No.
We all had to be taught that. Parents, we understand just how much we have to teach our children about what is right and what is wrong. We understand that. But if there is no God, then how did we get this concept of what is good? How do we get this concept of what is right or what is just?
From the
We were
atheist
taught.
perspective, would they say, I mean, I'm just thinking they would say that right or what is good would come from the idea of what is best for all humanity for self-preservation, I guess. Not necessarily for an individual self-preservation, but, you know, as a whole for all of humanity, what is best for them. You know, obviously killing another human would be an evil thing because it, you know, obviously does not help humanity survive and exist, I guess.
That's true from what you and I would say, but wouldn't Adolf Hitler disagree with you?
Well, yeah,
From
because
Adolf,
he was purifying the human race, I guess.
that's right. In his mindset, the Holocaust, the genocide of Jews and Catholics and homosexuals and gypsies, 6 million Jews killed in a 12-year period, I believe. As far as Hitler and the Nazis were concerned, that was good. That was right. That was in humanity's best interests, you know? So.
Yeah. I'm not saying that people can't disagree with what is right, because I think, you know, people are going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the idea of a universal system of rightness would have to come from the idea of what is best for humanity.
Yeah, and I see where you're coming from, but your last point is also true. We can't, by ourselves, completely on our own, without a higher authority, we're not going to agree on that.
I agree.
We're not even going to come close to agreeing on that. In fact, you know, I'm working on graduate certification and possibly a master's. I haven't made up my mind on that yet, but I'm taking a lot of courses on apologetics right now. And a few weeks ago, I took a class on philosophy, and I learned quite a lot about all the different views of what we're talking about. There are people out there that say, well, there is no such thing as right. There isn't. There is no such thing as right. There is no such thing as wrong. Now, I personally don't get how anyone can truly believe that and hold to it consistently. But there are people out there that are willing to try. And then there are others that are like what you brought up, Clay. I mean, it's in what is in the best interest of humanity, but then they'll narrow that down and they'll say, well, it's in what's in the best interest of my particular my particular circle of humanity, my culture, my society. And that might not apply to your culture, your society, but it does to me. But then that raises the question, okay, so, if my culture says that it's right to kill 6 million Jews and your culture says that it's not, well, then what gives your culture the right to tell my culture that I'm wrong? You're not a part of my culture. In fact, that's actually what that was the Nazis' defense in the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II. That's how they were trying to get off from being punished. They were saying, hey, United States, England, you guys, the Allied nations, who gives you the right to tell us what is right and what is wrong? You're not part of our country. But the one of the lawyers for the Allies in the Nuremberg trials, he was an Englishman. I forgot his name, but he basically pointed out. He said, there is a universal standard of right and wrong that applies to all countries and all cultures, and you violated it, and that's why we're punishing you. But again, and we would agree with that lawyer, right? Of course we would. But again, take God out of the picture. What gives that lawyer the right to say that? Where do we get this universal system of rightness from outside of God? My point is, in order for the concept of rightness and justice to exist, there has to be a God. And if there is no God, that means that there is no universal sense of rightness. And if there is no universal sense of rightness, then how could evil exist? You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
How could there be hold on one second. How could there be any violation of that standard of right if there is no God to create that standard? I mean, we've already established that the term evil suggests the violation of some standard. Jake, you brought it up from the religious standpoint. What is evil? Well, it's the violation of God's standards. Okay? Evil, in order for evil to exist, some standard of good must be violated. So when you think about it, any atheist who says that there is no God, that atheist cannot even talk about the problem of evil in the world and still be completely consistent in his own philosophy. Do you see what I'm saying? The existence of evil in the world proves that there is such a thing as good in the world, and that proves the existence of God. Any thoughts on this? Yes.
Backing up just a little bit, I was just thinking, as a librarian, and maybe Nathan's read some of these books too, Clay, there's almost like a whole different genre for books about societies that start off as supposedly utopian, perfect, but then they have such rules and regulations that go totally wrong and things go really bad. And then you end up with a dystopian society where everything is really bad, and because they're using their human standards to create the society that they think is best. And it doesn't always go that way, and it doesn't without God,
That's true. I mean, history in real life, outside of fiction, history shows that to be the case. I mean, John Adams said about the United States, about our society, about our constitutional system of government. John Adams says that the Constitution was made for a just and religious people, and if society as a whole becomes completely unjust and abandons the Christian religion, John Adams and other founding fathers says the Constitution is not going to work for that kind of society. So we see that played out in real life. Any other thoughts? Here's something else to think about. Let's talk about love for a second. the concept of love, and not just love, but freedom of choice. Love allows freedom of choice. Would you all agree with that?
Yes.
I mean, you think about you think about marital love, love in marriage. Um, the person who, let's say you have a wife and she's married to a husband that is like a complete dictator in the home. He tries to control every single aspect of her life. She has to have the towels folded in the exact right way. She has to have the cans in the pantry organized exactly the way he wants. The dinner has to be served exactly the way he wants it. Every little thing on the dish has to be placed just so. Her entire life has to be 100% completely in accordance with everything that he wants. There's no love
Is there
there.
something wrong with that?
Hey, let's get Melissa on this. Get Melissa in here. Say, but there's something wrong with that, isn't there? I mean, there's no love there. You know. Now he might delude himself into thinking that he loves his wife, but I mean, she doesn't feel love, does she? You know,
No.
love allows freedom of choice. So here's my question: could anyone conceive of a loving God? Because again, that's the God of the Bible, right? God is love. Can anyone conceive of a loving God who created intelligent beings like human beings, but then basically programmed them to be his slaves and serve him without personal freedom of choice, without personal willpower? Is that a loving God that would do that? That just flies in the face of our understanding of love. So love allows freedom of choice, and we know that God is love. 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. So love allows freedom of choice, all right? And God is love. So that means that God allows freedom of choice. Now, with that in mind, consider this. No human being is perfect, right? We are not perfect. Every single one of us has made mistakes, and every single one of us will continue to make mistakes, right? Now, freedom of choice exists. We all know that. We are all free to make whatever choices in life that we want to make. But none of us are perfect. And so that means that if we have freedom of choice and we're not perfect, then that opens up the possibility that we will make the wrong choices, right? I mean, is there anyone in this discussion that has made wrong choices? You know, sure we have. And here's what else we know about wrong choices. Wrong choices can produce evil and suffering in this world. Because after all, if every single choice that anyone makes, the good choices and the bad choices, if they produce the exact same results, the exact same effect, then how would any of us ever learn to choose the good choices and reject the bad choices? How would any of us even want to learn to choose the good choices and reject the bad choices? Like, Clay, you're a teacher, right? So, I mean, an A is good and an F is bad, right? And
I would think so.
and all Fs would be pretty bad news for the student who got all Fs. Would they? I mean, if it's just straight zeros right down the board, they probably would not advance on to the next grade, right?
Right.
You would think not.
Yeah, I know that that opens up a whole different discussion, but generally speaking,
Yes,
they they should not, right?
they should not.
So going ahead and saying, okay, I see that you didn't even show up for one class ever the entire school year. You didn't turn in one homework assignment. Any test that you took, every single answer you got was wrong. You got zeros in every class. Good job. We're advancing you to the next grade. All right. So
That
we're
sounds
not.
like education.
Yeah, maybe this was the wrong illustration to use here, but my point is that what we're not giving that student any motivation to make the right choices, so that he would make choices that would lead to him getting a higher grade. We're not giving him the motivation. If we are basically if there's no difference between making the good choices and the bad choices. The student who made the right choices and thus got A's, he is advancing. The student that did the exact opposite, made all the bad choices, well, he's also advancing. So why would either one of them be motivated to learn to do what is good, right? So what we now know is that where freedom of choice exists, it is inevitable that we as imperfect human beings must be allowed to suffer the consequences of choices we make that are wrong. In light of this, let's think about, why does suffering exist in the world? Let's think about the different kinds of suffering that exists in the world. I want some feedback here. Why do people suffer? What is our suffering the result of? Give me your thoughts on that.
Sin.
Sin. Okay. What else?
I agree with what Clay just said. You look at Romans chapter 8, verse 10, it says that the body is dead because of sin.
Right. All right. Sin is definitely one. Have you ever gone through a bad time and it was not because of anything wrong that you personally did?
Well, of course. And when I say that it's a result of sin, I'm not saying that it is necessarily a direct result of your sin.
Right.
I mean, you got, for example, somebody dies in a car crash because there was a drunk driver on the road. Well, that person suffered and their family suffered, not because of the sin of, that particular person, but from the sin of somebody else, from another person. So I think, all suffering comes from sin, whether it's directly a result of our choices or somebody else's choices, or, you can tie it all the way back to Adam and Eve. That choice caused a lot of suffering in the world, because if it wasn't for their wrong choice, then we would all live in a perfect world, right? So,
very true.
So when I say sin, I'm not. It's not. I mean, I think a lot of people think, well, if you do good, good things are going to happen, and if you do bad, bad things are going to happen to you. And that's not necessarily the case all the time.
That's true. Are there other reasons outside of sin, either your sin or someone else's sin, that would be why suffering happens in this world? Can you think of any?
I mean, we always suffer with death.
That's
I mean, that's just kind of a part of life,
Yeah.
separating.
And from a biblical perspective, that also goes back to sin, though, right?
That's true.
Yeah, Adam and Eve that brought death into the world because of that. Here are some thoughts that I have on this. Sometimes we suffer due to our own personal wrong choices, right? For example, if I steal something and I go to prison as a result, whose fault is that?
It's all yours.
That's right. It's my fault.
Or Beth's.
No, Beth, it won't be Beth's fault. Now, I know that I can't see her and she's muted, so she might not be paying attention. If she's not paying attention, it's her fault. If she is paying attention, no, it's my fault. My fault. She's
But
not.
stealing is still sin.
Yeah, she's not speaking up, so I think I got away with it. Yeah, but in all seriousness, Jake, your point's right. Stealing is still sin. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 15. Let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Now he's talking about suffering, but he is saying here, you know what? If you're going to suffer, don't let the cause of it be because of something you did that's wrong. Don't let it be because you murdered someone or you stole something, you did evil in any way, or you meddled in other people's business. But why do we suffer? Here's one reason: because of our own wrong choices. I think we all can agree with that, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, we also suffer due to as a consequence of other people's freedom of choice. I could be walking down the street, minding my own business, and I could be killed in a wreck involving a drunk driver, and the driver became drunk because he made the wrong choice. He made the choice to drink alcohol, and then he made another bad choice when he chose to get behind the wheel while he was drunk. And so sometimes we pay the price and we suffer. We pay the price for the freedom of choice that others have. Now, we want to have the freedom to make our own choices, right? But when we deny that to everyone else, is John the only person in the world that's allowed to have freedom of choice? No. We all have the freedom to make our own choices. And sometimes suffering happens because other people make the wrong choices and we get caught up in it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now here's I think those are the two topics that we've already touched on when I asked for feedback. You guys basically brought that up, right? But here's something else too. Sometimes we suffer because people in former generations made bad choices. Have you ever thought about that?
Mm-mm.
Go over to Exodus chapter 20, and if I could have a volunteer read verses 5 and 6. Exodus chapter 20, verses 5 and 6. And whoever has it, go ahead and read it.
You said 5 and 6.
Yes, Exodus chapter 20, verses 5 and 6.
You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations to those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments.
Okay, so I want to focus on the part where he says that he is a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Now, I remember the first time as an adult, as a preacher, I remember the first time I read that verse. And I remember thinking, okay, how in the world can I make this coincide with a God of love? Because at first glance, this seems kind of harsh, doesn't it? It seems kind of unfair. Why would God allow hardship to happen to children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren as a result of their parents' sins? Any thoughts on that? Think about this for a second. How are you involved in this class right now? Let's see, you have an iPad or you have a computer, and then there's the internet, right? And then you're using a camera, right? Was the camera invented last year? No, who invented the very first camera? I don't know who it was, but I can tell you when it was. It was in the 1840s that the camera was invented. All right, Clay's looking it up on Google. I know he is. Clay's my guy that
I do.
in Bible class, Clay, he's the guy that goes to Google when I ask these questions. Okay. So,
Johann Zahn.
okay, there you go. And what, am I right, was in the 1840s?
1880s.
1880s. All right. I think
Well,
you
they
got,
had cameras for Civil War.
yeah, and James Polk, who was the first president to be photographed, and he was president in the 1840s.
What is the oldest camera in the world? I don't know. I'm not getting into the, 1839.
Okay, I was off by 1 year. All right, 1839. But we are reaping the benefits of people who worked on cameras and the internet and everything that we are using right now to have this class. There are people of former generations who put the hard work into it. Now, I'm not saying that this generation did not put any hard work into it. Of course, that happens. Every generation puts hard work into innovation. And guess what? Our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren are going to reap the benefits of what we do in this generation, right? The car that you drive, the refrigerator that you use, the television that you watch. Do any of you guys like to drink milk? Do you like pasteurized milk? Well, Louis Pasteur, you got him to thank for that. The shampoo that you use, the soap that you use, the toothpaste you use, the toothbrushes that you use, all of this and so much more. It's in our lives because previous generations worked hard to invent them and bring them about, right? So we are reaping the benefits of the good choices and the hard work of former generations. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So can we avoid reaping the evils that come from their bad choices? If we reap the benefits of the good choices, can we also reap the consequences of their bad choices?
Absolutely.
Sure. I mean, you think about John Calvin. Let's bring religion into this for just a second. You think about John Calvin, who he came up with. Well, he wasn't the first to come up with it, but he was the one that really made it popular. He came up with the false doctrine that mankind is totally depraved, that we inherit the sins of our parents, that God has chosen a select few before they were even born to be saved no matter what, and the rest of us, he's already decided before we were born that we will be condemned. Once saved, always saved, limited atonement, all of those are false doctrines that to this day deceive literally hundreds of thousands of people all over the world. John Calvin lived centuries ago. He taught all this centuries ago. But we are still reaping the bad consequences of the wrong choices that he made theologically. Okay? Let me give you another example. Why are innocent children starving in some countries on the other side of the world? The answer is, in some cases, it's because their ancestors rejected God and they decided to worship cows. That's true. The cow, in the minds of many, even to this day, is so sacred that if your family is starving, it's still against both religious and even civil law in some areas to kill a cow and eat it. And so there are some who would rather let their children starve than violate that tenet of pagan idolatry. Let me give you another example. Think about the numerous diseases that harm mankind all over the planet. Ultimately, all of these diseases are related to humanity's bad choices, to humanity's sin. Now, you brought up Adam and Eve earlier. Before Adam and Eve sinned, they were not affected by disease or death. There was no death, there was no disease before Adam and Eve sinned. But when Adam and Eve rebelled against God, they were deprived of the tree of life, right? They were rejected. They were kicked out of the Garden of Eden where the tree of life was. And their offspring, their descendants, that would be you and me, we have inherited the conditions of disease and death that they introduced into the world. Romans chapter 5, verse 12, which you can see on the screen, that talks about that. It says, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sin. Think about this. Does suffering in the world, does some of it come from natural causes like hurricanes? Do hurricanes cause suffering? Do earthquakes cause suffering?
Yes.
What produced all of these violent physical conditions in this planet, like hurricanes and earthquakes? Answer, the drastically different geophysical features of the earth. Some parts of this planet are mountainous, other parts of this planet are desert. And with each one of these different regions, there are different kinds of pressure areas in them. And all of that contributes to storms, to earthquakes, to hurricanes, things of that nature. What was it that created all of these different geophysical features of the planet, which ended up causing the hurricanes and the storms and the earthquakes, which produce suffering in mankind? What was it?
The flood.
Exactly. It was the worldwide flood back in the days of Noah that caused the huge changes in the climate, in the weather, and on the land. Now, why did the flood happen?
Of sin.
Because of man's sin, man's evil. So if it wasn't for the wrong choices that mankind made thousands of years ago, the flood would never have come. And that means that the features of the earth would not have been so drastically changed to what they are today, which results in the hurricanes and the earthquakes and the storms of today. And we would not be suffering from those causes today. Does that make sense? We suffer because former generations made bad choices. Now, I've given you, on the screen there, I've given you some choices that have to do with bad choices with pagan idol worship or bad choices that produced the flood. But we can think of many other scenarios in which this is true as well. The South as a whole, many in the South, was really pushing slavery, right? Civil War came about, and the economy of the South was in ruins for about 100 years afterwards. The majority of the populace of the South from the 1860s to the 1960s was in abject poverty, suffering as a result of bad choices made from former generations. Does that make sense?
I think we've got to realize that the choices we make affect not only us, but other people around us. So, and that doesn't necessarily just lend to who we come in contact with. You know, we make choices that may affect people we will never meet.
Exactly.
Just like talking about future and generations are going to either suffer or be rewarded based on things and choices that we make.
Very true. Very true. It's sobering when you think about it. Now, here's something else. Another reason suffering takes place is because we live in a world that's regulated by the laws of nature. Does the law of gravity act consistently?
Yep.
Of course it does, right? So that means that a building could fall on someone. And if a building falls on someone, that could kill them or that could injure them. Now, what if God always stepped in and stopped that from happening by suspending the laws of nature? Could all of that, could all the bad things that gravity would produce, like a building falling on someone, if God just stepped in and just stopped it and suspended the laws of nature, then he could cause a lot of he could keep a lot of the evil, well, not evil, but a lot of the suffering from happening, right? But here's the thing: if God did that, then, and if he did it continually, then we could never depend on the laws of nature, right? And if we can't depend on the laws of nature, then that would result in chaos in our own lives, in chaos in society. You jump off the diving board, but one day you're going to fall into the water, but then the next day you might just hang suspended in midair because God doesn't want you to hit your head. You don't know. You wouldn't know what's happening, right? It would cause total confusion. And that confusion, when you think about it, that would give more credibility to the theories of atheism than it would to prove the fact that God exists. We suffer because we live in a world that's regulated by the laws of nature, and those laws of nature are evidence that God exists. Does that make sense? Here's another reason why suffering happens. It's because, believe it or not, it can be beneficial. It can be beneficial. Now, we don't like to think that, but it's true. What if we could experience no pain whatsoever? No pain. That would be wonderful, right? If it was impossible for us to feel pain of any kind at any time, that would be great, right?
I would staple reminders to my chest.
Well, here's the thing, Sheila. What if your clothes caught on fire? What if your clothes caught on fire and you could feel no pain and you didn't know it was happening? Because you didn't. Maybe it starts at the bottom with your shoes, and you never look down, right? And so your shoes could be completely engulfed, which means that your feet could be completely engulfed, and you would be severely burned, and you would not have any idea that it was happening because you can't feel any pain, can you?
No.
Right? Why do people go to the doctor?
Pain.
Yeah, we don't just wake up feeling fine and say I feel wonderful. Today is a wonderful day to go to the doctor because I feel great. No, we go to the doctor, we go to the hospital because there's something wrong, because there's pain, because we're suffering in some way. And guess what? When we go to the doctor, we go to the hospital, then if there's something wrong, then we are going to get that treatment, and it's more likely that we will be cured. So does pain have some benefit? Sure. Not only that, but think about this. Isn't it true that suffering helps us to develop the highest qualities that we are capable of? Think about it. If there was no suffering, could we truly learn patience? If there was no suffering, could we truly learn compassion?
Mm-mm.
If there was no suffering, could we truly learn courage in our own lives? Go over to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, and I'd like to volunteer to read verses 5 through 11. Hebrews 12, verses 5 through 11. And when you have it, go ahead and read it.
And you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those who the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all of you have become partakers, and you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness.
All right. What are your thoughts on that passage? What is meant in that passage? What is God trying to tell us?
I think it's very relevant to this discussion that just because we're suffering, it doesn't mean that God has rejected us, that he doesn't care about us.
And what can that suffering produce in us?
Love.
It can make us better, right?
Love.
Yeah. It can produce godly characteristics like love. How many here love sunshine? You like sunshine?
Yes.
How many here love stormy weather? Do you love stormy weather?
Safe.
Which do you prefer, sunshine or stormy weather?
Sunshine.
Sunshine, right? Have you ever thought about that the only place on this planet where there is absolutely nothing but sunshine is a desert? How many of y'all want to live in a desert? Saudi Arabia, the Arabian desert. You want to hang out there for the rest of your life? It's nothing but sunshine, right? Here's my point. Sunshine is wonderful and stormy clouds are not, but if all we got was sunshine, in the end, it would not be good for us.
Yes.
Suffering helps us to become better people. And that's the point that the Hebrews passage is making. Yeah, and I think one of you brought up this point earlier as well, but another benefit of suffering is that it reminds us that this world is not our home. And aren't we glad of that this world is not our home?
Yes.
You know, the Old Testament giants of faith, the book of Hebrews says that they all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. The writer of Hebrews brings out that the giants of faith in the Old Testament, they went through some suffering. They went through some hard times, and one of the things that suffering brought out for them, it reminded them that they did not belong here, that there was something better for them. Peter calls us sojourners and exiles, 1 Peter 2, verse 11. God wants us to think of ourselves as strangers on this earth. This world is not our home. We're just a passing through, right?
Yes.
But if we experienced absolutely no suffering in this world, why would we ever want to leave it?
Correct.
God promises us in Job chapter 3, verse 17, that there is a place where, quote, the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. The suffering that happens in this world can motivate us to want to go to heaven, that eternal rest where there is no pain, there is no evil. It motivates us to obey God so that we can obtain that eternal reward. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, here's my last point of the class. we need to remember that suffering per se is not contrary to the concept of God's goodness, if for no other reason than even God himself suffered. Jesus, the Son of God, deity, suffered on the cross. Peter brings that out, and so does the writer of Hebrews. And the suffering that Jesus went through on the cross was extreme. And so it is clear enough from this alone that human suffering can be explained so that any accusations that atheists make about suffering, a loving God doesn't exist because evil exists, suffering exists, and if a loving God really exists, he would not allow evil and suffering to exist. If any time an atheist makes that claim, we can prove it to be false because we know enough about human suffering to see that there are benefits that come from it, that it also, the fact that it exists, it points to the existence of God. Does that make sense? Any closing thoughts or comments?
I guess that's the reason I was always taught. Mama would always say everything happens for a reason. You never question it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I see Chandra here. Chandra, I didn't even know you were here. Good to see you.
Yes, I'm here. I was a little late, but I'm here.
Glad you're here. But any other thoughts on what we've been talking about tonight? All right. Well, we're going to pick this up next week. Same time, same channel, Mondays at 7. And give me just 1 second here. Let me pull up what I had for next week so I give you all an idea of what I had planned on the agenda here. All right. Let's see. Okay, next week, what we're going to be looking at is proving the existence of God. We're going to be looking at different types of proof that God exists, examining the nature of that proof. And that's going to take us a couple of weeks. So next week, Monday, 7 o'clock, does God exist? And what proof can we offer to his existence? That sound like something interesting?
Yes.
All right. Well, Lord willing, we will be getting into that. Thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it. And we're going to go ahead and end unless anyone else has anything else they want to add.
Have a good night, everyone.
All right. You all have a good night, and I will see you later. Have a good Thanksgiving.
You too.